Europe is not the happiest right now with the United States, but can the EU step up to take America's place? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell, and today I'm talking about Europe. Europe is furious with America, especially with Donald Trump. After the Trump-Zelensky blow-up, Europe says Trump's America is no longer a reliable ally, no longer the defender of democracy, nor the leader of the free world. America betrayed Europe.
The Europeans had a lot of time to get used to the idea of a US that is more transactional. But what they see now is something much worse, which is that the US is not just transactional, but also predatory. That all of a sudden they're turning on the Europeans. They're adopting the agenda of the perpetrator, of Putin.
But this didn't just start with Trump and Ukraine. There are much deeper roots to why Europe is upset with America. For one, they're upset that they can no longer assume the U.S. will always have their back, even if they have differences in opinion. Previous U.S. presidents have taken public jabs at Europe from time to time, but they mostly focused on positive vibes and kept disagreements private. The Trump administration shows that it's much more willing to publicly butt heads with Europe and criticize its leaders on things like their hate speech laws. People don't exactly like it when you compare them to authoritarians to their faces, go figure. But even before Trump's return to office, with the Ukraine war, and the prospects of war in the Asia-Pacific, Europeans are forced to reckon with the fact that Americans expect Europeans to fall in line, especially on things like China. But Europe does a lot of business with China, and Russia too. But not as much with the United States anymore. And I'm not just talking about Trump tariffs. Europe was not happy with Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, over fears it would siphon investment and production away from them. All this is why, even before Trump's re-election, those like French President Macron warned that Europe must resist pressure to become America's followers. But there are challenges. Europe doesn't just have a massive trade deficit with the US, there's also its dependence on America for security. That's why there's been a lot of talk of Europe asserting strategic autonomy and independence from Trump's America. Europeans are also saying the free world needs a new leader. And that leader is me. What's that, Shelley? Oh, I guess they're saying it's up to the Europeans to take on this challenge. Unfortunately for the EU, it doesn't seem like it's up to the challenge. The dream of the EU from the beginning was creating a unified European bloc that could rival powers like the United States and China. A Brexit later, and the cracks are beginning to show. Now, France and Germany are the biggest powers in the EU, and a lot of other EU member states aren't too happy with that, especially since France and Germany can't agree on anything. Social turmoil is boiling over. As for defending human rights around the world, it's a mixed bag. There have definitely been some achievements, but some European countries have blocked criticism of China's human rights records, while others just stayed quiet. According to the 2023 Journal of Human Rights Practice, Europe has grown into a cartel of silence on human rights. Is Europe willing to give up close economic ties with communist China, the same regime that's fueling genocide and Russia's war machine? Or again, what about Russian oil and gas? That's why the EU's promises of support to Ukraine rings a bit hollow. Europe didn't seem to care enough to build up its military after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. Or Crimea in 2014. Instead, Europe insisted on doing business as usual. And even with Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Europe still held back on ramping up its own military. It took Trump coming into office again for Europeans to be like, fine, you want more military spending? Here, happy now? Why, yes. The problem is defense spending will cut into welfare spending. Social welfare programs are ingrained in European societies, and for many European officials, the idea of dismantling the welfare state for more money to the military is political suicide. It also doesn't help that Europe has a weak economy with an aging population. But say Europe strikes the right balance for conventional security. How far will Europe go in terms of nuclear security? Given everything that's been happening, there are discussions of France and the UK stepping up and replacing the US nuclear umbrella with their own. Incoming German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said the changed global security situation now necessitates that we Europeans discuss this matter together. Now, to be clear, the US has made no mention of withdrawing its nuclear umbrella. It appears that Europeans are talking about it just in case, which, to be fair, anything is on the table these days. French President Macron said his country is at least open to discussing extending its nuclear deterrence, while keeping French nuclear weapons under French control, of course. They're just like regular nuclear weapons, but somehow more pretentious. But creating a European nuclear umbrella without the US is much easier said than done. For one, France and the UK don't nearly have as many nuclear warheads as the US or Russia. What they call an arsenal, the US calls a rounding error. Also, the UK has what's called a sole nuclear platform, meaning that it can only launch nuclear missiles from sea via its Vanguard submarines. Unfortunately for Europe, those bad boys depend on US infrastructure and maintenance. When the US says from sea to shining sea, that shining is nuclear fallout. France has more ways to deliver nuclear weapons, but there are other constraints. As it stands, France's nuclear doctrine is strictly focused on protecting its own national interests. Extending French nuclear security to the EU is a tall bargain. It also makes France a huge target. So, big question, is France willing to sacrifice Paris for Amsterdam? Will love win? Even if the answer is yes, this would require a major shift in France's nuclear doctrine and a massive expansion to its nuclear arsenal to make a nuclear umbrella like the US's. That'll cost a lot of money and require significant logistical and operational changes. Analysts have warned it could take France up to a decade to increase its arsenal by only 100 warheads, whereas the US calls it a rounding error's rounding error. If Europe wants to be a great leader, do they need to enforce strict censorship laws to force countries to get their act together or something? Yep, nothing says we want to stand up to dictators like acting like a dictator. Europe is not exactly the bastion of freedom they make themselves out to be. Vance was right in his speech at the Munich Security Conference that free speech is not cherished in Europe the way it is in the United States.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
It is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well.
Future leaders of the free world right there. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to be an ally, please help me survive by supplying me with coffee. Subscribe to our new premium website, AmericaUncovered.tv. Just click this button that's been on the screen. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.